The question here is, we're not asking what really happened. The question is, what did Matthew think happened?
Right.
What does he want you to think happened?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at, I call them the three pillars in Paul that make historicists see historicity, or they interpret Paul through the lens of historicity based on these three pillars. So this is a big video. This is important. Clearly you have to get the book by Dr. Richard Carrier. Thank you for joining me today. That is The Obsolete Paradigm of the Historical Jesus.
That's right, yeah.
That is the seed of David. Jesus is of the seed of David. He was born of a woman. And of course, the last one is
Brothers of the Lord.
Brothers of the Lord. So I keep having that problem. Maybe because he didn't have brothers. I'm just kidding. So
Can't remember, which kind of brothers were they?
yeah. And that's going to be something to tackle, right? So you have these three brothers of the Lord. Well, there's this odd passage, right? They go, well, James, he's not.
Yeah, there's actually two, but there's one that says James, the brother of the Lord, and then there's another one that just mentions him as a group, the brothers of the Lord.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so the James one, I think, is the real thing that people get caught up on. Seed of David, of course. Well, he descended from David, right? That's how they understand it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the last one, by the third, I always forget. Okay, so let's just start.
Born of a woman. I guess,
Born of a
where we're at. Is that what we're going to start with?
Yeah, well, let's start with that, because I know that when I talked to Bob Price thinks it's odd that you would even need to say someone's born of a woman. Everyone's born of a woman.
That's right.
Mention him, right?
Yeah.
And then I've heard from people that in Jewish idioms, it is an expression. So it's not like a weird thing to go, someone's born.
Yeah, it's an expression, but that doesn't answer Bob Price's question, right? It's like, why is the expression here? Like, why put it here? That is a valid question. And there might be answers. There might be historicist answers. There might be answers. But you do need to ask, like, this is a strange thing to say suddenly. And usually if something strange pops up, like, why is he dropping that idiom here? The way you normally answer that is to look at the context. What is the context? How does this relate to because he's making an argument. So, like, what point does that make that's relevant to his argument?
So tell us about the argument.
Yeah.
And then also keep in mind, if you could tackle this while we're there so I don't forget, because you can really get into the weeds here.
That's right, yeah.
They just look to John the Baptist and say, of men born of women, John the Baptist, right? So they'll go, see, here we have a gospel example of a man born of a woman.
Yeah, it's identifying someone as mortal, essentially.
Right.
So the question is, well, first of all, the idiom is not here. The idiom used begotten of, right? So it means begotten of a woman. Paul chose to not say that, which is weird, right? He chose made of a woman, came from a woman. It's a different phrase. But when he talks about people, just a few lines later, like actual historical people, he uses begotten. He uses the correct idiom. It says begotten of a woman. So why does he switch back to a different idiom it's not the mortality idiom?
We're in Galatians, right?
Galatians 4:4, yeah.
Got it.
So why does he do that? So that's the big question, right? And now it becomes clearer when you realize that this is the exact same word that Paul uses in Philippians 2 when he says Jesus came into the likeness of a person, right? And he became the likeness of a man, which is a weird way to talk about birth, and again is not the word for birth. It's when Paul talks about birth, he always uses begotten. He uses the other word. When he talks about bodies being made, however, like Adam or our resurrection bodies, he uses this word of made or come to be. He uses the same word. So when you look at Galatians 4:4, it's the same word that Paul always uses for manufactured bodies. He uses it of Adam. He uses it of our resurrection bodies. And he uses it in Philippians 2 when he's talking about the incarnation, where God's forming a body for Jesus. So you have all of this basically is telling you right away, even when he talks about the seed of David, which we'll get to, it's the same switch. He term switches from begotten and uses instead this manufactured word.
Right? Genomai, the manufactured.
Genomai, yeah. I don't know if we want to get into the Greek. It's
not
really necessary. People who want to get into the Greek can check the book. I've got all of this in there. And I have one chapter on each of these things, because these are the pillars left. It's the only evidence left of these three passages in Paul, and kind of historicity stands on these, and they're really weak legs is the point. It's also worth pointing out that in the book, as in my original study, I actually conclude on the upper end of my margin of error that these are evidences for historicity. So I'm actually saying this is evidence for historicity. My argument is that they're weak evidence. They're weak legs. They're not strong legs. And they're weak legs because of all the weirdness. If it wasn't for all the weirdness, they wouldn't be weak. It's all the weirdness that makes it weak. And so I actually count them each 2-1. So altogether, it's 8-1 in favor of historicity. It's just all the other evidence drags it down, right? But so I'm actually counting this as evidence for historicity. This gets forgotten and overlooked too much. So I got to point that out. I'm actually granting it now on my side. The other side, I don't grant it. But on the upper margin, where I'm pushing the limits of my uncertainty, then I grant it there, right? But it's still weak. Why is it weak? The first evidence is the one I just mentioned. Paul switches out the word. He doesn't give the standard idiom. He changes it with this word that he uses everywhere else for manufacture and also everywhere else for Jesus. Every time he talks about Jesus, he uses this word, and he never uses it of human births. Okay, so that's weirdness number one.
I like here how you analogize it to Adam personally, because we all know Adam was not born.
Was not born. His body was made, right? And our future resurrection bodies are the same. That he's talking about God going to manufacture them for us. Anyway, so you have that, right? The second point of this is that when you're trying to answer, like, well, first of all, why did he put the idiom there? And then why did he change the idiom? Again, like I said, you got to look at context. When you look at the context, he says, well, I'm talking about mothers who are allegorical. I'm using mothers allegorically here in my argument. And so he's telling you, like, this is just an allegorical point, which means that we don't know whether Paul believed or knew that Jesus had a human mother, because he's not talking about that here. That's not relevant to his point, right? And this is true even if, like, you go full on and say, well, he's talking about the virgin birth, right? That the fetus was manufactured by God inside Mary or whatever. Or even something weirder, like Jesus was teleported out of the womb. Or it's even weirder that it was born and then Jesus' spirit came in and possessed the baby after birth. Or like, you can come up with all these weird theories as to what's going on. But even if that's the case, he's still doing the same thing. He's still talking allegorically. He's not talking about the literal mechanics of how Jesus came into the universe. It's not relevant to his argument. His argument is solely allegorical. And the two competing mothers he's talking about are the Hagar and Sarah, who are not literal historical people in this argument. They represent worlds of being. And so his whole argument, it goes all the way from Galatians 3 all the way through the end of 4. So it's not like he changes his argument and is talking about something else when he talks about the allegories. The allegory point is relevant to the entire argument, right? And he starts, like in Galatians 3, talking about how he's trying to explain how allegorically Gentiles can be the seed of Abraham, right? So, and it's very clear, he's elaborately explaining that he's not talking about biology. When I say seed of Abraham, I do not mean biology, right? He's going through elaborate explanation for this. So we know he's doing allegory. And you go through it line by line, every freaking line of this argument from beginning to end, from Galatians 3 through to the end of 4, everyone is allegorical. Like, it's obvious, like nothing literal is going on here. And that's not a concealed thing. Like, Paul is deliberately using allegories to make his point, and it's very clear. He's explaining the allegories. Even like he outright says, okay, look, the mothers I'm talking about are allegorical. Like, he's not trying to hide the fact that he's being allegorical. He's being explicit repeatedly that he's being allegorical. So he goes from seed of Abraham, and that's the first thing. And then, of course, what's the Abraham story? Well, that's the Sarah and Hagar story.
Right.
So you can look at the chiasmus of this argument from 3 to 4. He starts with Abraham, phases into Sarah and Hagar, and then he does like the exegesis of Abraham, then the argument from that exegesis, then he does the argument from Sarah and Hagar, and then does the exegesis of Sarah and Hagar. And so it's all one argument, right? You can't pull them apart and I say they're different contexts or not. So it's all the same thing. So when he says the mothers are allegories, and then he goes on to explain what the allegories are, and he says, okay, so Hagar, to be born of Hagar means to be born of the mortal world, that you are subject to the evils and decays of the world. And he's not even talking about when he says subject to the law, he's not talking about being Jewish either, because even Gentiles are subject to the law. The thing is that the Gentiles just don't get an escape clause, right? Because they haven't entered the covenant, so they don't get to escape the consequences of the law, which is death. Right? So like they're still subject to the law. They're just not recognizing it, not doing anything about it. Whereas the Jews, of course, are trying to use this to try and figure out, can we get our escape clause out of this? Is there a way that we can be under the law and still get out, right? Yeah. And so the original covenant was, yes, you could do this through the atonement system, yada, yada. Christianity came up with their own way of doing it, right? Of how do you get out? And so he's talking about the world order being subject to death, essentially, is what he's saying. And when you're a son of Sarah, then you've escaped this. You're actually a higher celestial person. You are no longer part of the mortal, deadly,
Born from
sinful
above.
world. Yeah, exactly. You're right. You are a superior being, and you now can live forever. And the whole argument is that everybody's a son of Sarah, of Hagar, right? Everybody's a son of Hagar. You're all doomed, but you can, through Christ, become a son of Sarah and get out, right? So that's this whole argument. So when he says born of a woman, and then immediately talks about different women and then what that means, and the allegories for these world orders, that's all Paul's talking about. He's just saying that Jesus became subject to the elements, subject to death, and so on. It's just an elaborate way of talking about he became incarnate.
Contextually, wouldn't it make more sense asking so here you have the seed of Abraham, which is Christ, this is like a wild, like what's going on here? That seed is Christ, right? Which like is saying that the way to fulfill the promises, to be part of this whole thing, is you, Mr. Christian, Mrs. Christian, is to be in Christ, which is like the pneuma, the whole nine, right?
Okay.
And that being born of a woman, isn't it safe to say that Jesus technically is what it's saying was born of Sarah? Because he
originally born of Hagar, right? Jesus is born of Hagar.
Okay.
That's kind of the point of the argument. He's born of Hagar, so he's subject to death. And then once he resurrected, now he was a son of Sarah.
Okay.
Right. So that's the argument. Paul doesn't explicitly say that because you're supposed to figure that out from his argument, that Jesus moved from one mother to another, just as we will. We start sons of Hagar, but we want to be sons of Sarah. And so through Christ, we can do that. And Christ is the model for doing it because he did it first.
Okay.
Right. So that's the whole argument from Galatians 3 to 4. That's how you get to be a seed of Abraham and all of this stuff. So when you look in context, well, now you're going like, well, now we don't know why he thinks Jesus became subject to the mortal world order. Does he mean actual physical birth to a woman? Well, he doesn't say that. And he seems to be avoiding saying that on purpose, right? Because he doesn't say begotten of a woman. Why did he say we are begotten of Hagar or then begotten of the woman? Why are they saying we are begotten? Because we have actual literal mothers, but Jesus is not begotten. He's made. Why switch it out? So if you combine both the allegorical discourse and the strange change of vocabulary.
Well, then you would just go to Adam because, there's all this Adamic theology in Paul. I think that better fits what you're saying.
No, absolutely right. And so the question, and you can even make this compatible with historicity and say that what Paul believed was that like 30 seconds before stepping up to John the Baptist, God manufactured a complete adult body for Jesus, and then Jesus walked up and was baptized, right? Like you could do that. That's not what they believe, but it's like it would be compatible with what Paul is saying. So the point is that what Paul is saying is too ambiguous to know whether, like, it doesn't say where this happened. It doesn't say, like, he's not specifying whether there was a physical woman for Jesus or not. Like, it's too vague, and that's the problem with it. And that's why it gets weak. It's a weak, wobbly pillar. It's not a strong one.
So let's move to the next pillar, and I think we'll start with, well, you've already tapped into a seed of David. I think we need to deal with
Yeah. So like, and I use the example in Obsolete Paradigm. I go through translations. I go through several Bible translations, and I start with the most outrageously, ridiculously false translation there's a Bible translation. It's so terrible. And then I go to increasingly more accurate Bible translations. These are real Bible translations, by the way, that I'm using. And I show how the apologetics works, right? So the apologetics is trying to get to this ridiculous version. But you dig down into what the Greek actually says, and you get to the bottom, and it's not that, right? And the ridiculous version is that Paul in Romans 1 verse 3 says that Jesus descended from David, right? So that would be if he said that, like descended from David, like Ignatius does, by the way. And I point out that's a difference. Like in the creed of Paul, that's not there, but in Ignatius 100 years later, suddenly it's important to say. In fact, there were apparently Christians denying that Jesus descended from David. So like in the sense, the exact wording that Ignatius says. But Ignatius says descended from David. If Paul had said that using the exact same words as Ignatius, that would be pretty good evidence. Like that would be much stronger. That'd be a more solid pillar for historicity. Yeah, that would definitely work. It wouldn't be a slam dunk. It wouldn't be a smoking gun.
It would help.
But it would definitely up the probability of the historicity of Jesus, no doubt. And remember, I'm already counting it 2-1, so it's already a weak pillar. It's not a missing pillar. I should say on my top margin of error, right? Like at the limits of my uncertainty, I'm willing to grant that it's at least a weak pillar. I think it's not, but I think it's not even there. I think the pillar falls apart. But the idea is that when Paul says that, he doesn't say like, why does he not say that? Why does he avoid saying that? He says specifically made from the sperm of David. Well, that's a really weird phrase. And this gets to, again, to like that's so weird that no one else, like everybody cites other examples of descendants through, ex spermatos, right? They do that, look, but none of those say made from sperm, right? Like why is Paul, again, corrupting the idiom? Why is he changing it? And he's changing it with this exact same word that he corrupted the idiom of born of a woman, and the exact same word that shows up in Philippians 2, and the exact same word that shows up in the construction of Adam's body, and the exact same word that comes in the construction of our resurrection body. Like the suspicions, like there's definitely, it's not a smoking gun, but there's smoke.
There's
right?
something different happening to Jesus. That
Like there's smoke, but you can't see the gun, right? Okay. That kind of thing.
Real quick,
it's weird.
This is important. I think this is important because I've come across people who try to mock your hypothesis. They'll talk about cosmic sperm bank, ha ha ha, right? Oh, well, you think that like an angel came down and scooped semen from David and like preserved it in a tank in heaven. They're mocking you. But rather than that, I want to get it from the horse's mouth, and that is, I feel like they try to make this like caricature of the mechanics of how this all could have happened, whereas you're just throwing out a possibility, because you, in your book, the latest book, you talk about proof of concept. You don't say this is what happened. You're saying, I've got rabbinic.
That's why it's weak. This is important to say that. So I still count it 2-1, right, in favor of Jesus. But it's a weak pillar because there are these other possibilities, and they're not possibilities I just made up. I actually have evidence that these possibilities were live options at the time. And we already have one in Galatians 3 where it's seed of Abraham. Like, if you can be seed of Abraham without biology, then so could Jesus be seed of David without biology, right? So Paul could be talking metaphorically. Fictive. Right, it could be allegorical. God just by fiat declared him the seed of David, right? Like, biology is not being implicated here, right? So like, it's some sort of divine fiat is happening. So that makes it difficult to tell.
That's a good point.
Right? It makes it difficult to tell, what does he mean, right? Is he talking about biology? Is he talking about God's will? What is he talking? Is he talking about the seed of Abraham, like metaphor? Is it allegory? What are we talking about?
And wouldn't that make the gospel genealogies a bit cleverly devised myth kind of genealogies?
Well, it's important to note, contrary to what Christian apologists say, both the genealogies, Matthew and Luke, both deny that the seed of David went from Joseph into Mary. So how was Jesus the seed of David?
Miracle.
Right, exactly. So this is the thing, is like, now let's get, like, they always try to get into the mind of Paul. Well, how could he say seed of David and not think descendants? And well, how could the gospel authors think seed of David and literally explicitly deny descendants? What are they doing? Like, how do they think he's the seed of David then? Like, what's the magic here, right?
It's got to be Roman fictive kinship kind of adoption language in a way.
But that would be allegorical or metaphorical. It wouldn't be literal, right?
That's what I'm saying.
So like if you could just say,
he could declare
that, right? Exactly.
And isn't that what he does?
If Joseph could just declare the seed of Manaheim to be the seed of David suddenly, there's no biological connection at all. He just declares it.
Isn't that
if Joseph can do it, God can do it, right? That's the thing.
But the baptism in Mark, it sounds like that's practically what happens. He declares, "You are my
That is absolutely right. Yeah.
And he does it. There's no birth.
And the reason that is because that's how Christians do it. The Christian baptism was adoption by God, and so.
But we are.
Mark's story is having
Christ.
That's right.
In his
so he could say, like, you are now the seed of David, just by fiat, right? It has nothing to do with biology, right? So, and again, that would be a form of making someone, you're just declaring it, you're making them.
Got it.
Therefore made from the sperm of David. Yes, the allegorical model is totally plausible, and I talk about this in the book. In the wording of Romans 1:3, it's very clearly referring to this prophecy, and it's one of the few prophecies in the Old Testament that is not interpreted to be about the Messiah. It is explicitly about the Messiah. So it's one of those prophecies that you cannot neglect, right? Like, if you can claim someone's the Messiah, they have to fit this prophecy. It is not optional, right? There's no way you can say that's not about the Messiah, therefore he doesn't have to fulfill it. No, it's about the Messiah. So Jesus has to fulfill. So if Paul believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and he does, he would have to believe, and the same for Peter and everyone else, they would have to believe that he fulfilled this prophecy, which is in 2 Samuel, and it's Nathan issues a prophecy about the seed of David. If you look at the wording of the original prophecy, it says that the seed that comes directly from the belly of David would sit on an eternal throne, and basically it's in the original prophecy, it's about Solomon, right? Because the son of David is Solomon. But the prophecy predicts that that seed, through the descendants of Solomon, would last forever, that the throne would last forever. But we know it didn't, right? By the time the Christians come to their belief, the throne had been gone for like a long time. Even after the Maccabees, like there's a long period of time where it wasn't sad at all. And then the Maccabees took over, but they're not Davidic heirs either. So like they're not really Davidic seed. But even if you believe they are, like come up with some excuse to think they are, there was still those centuries in between when the throne was gone. So the throne did not sit eternally. So how can that prophecy is plainly falsified, right? Like your Messiah, it's gone. You have no Messiah anymore. There's no way you can get your Messiah to fit this. So what did Jewish apocalypticists do? Like how did they, it's a panic mode. How do you solve this problem? And we have an example of one of the things they did is they said, well, okay, there was another son of David, like the brother of Solomon, that God has kept alive for like 1,000 years, and he's still wandering. He's a wandering beggar. There's one rabbinical text talking about how he's a beggar at the gate of Rome, waiting for the time for God to tell him it's your time now to step up and be the seed of David, right? And so that way you can have no interruption, so that the son of David, the direct son of David, just like the prophecy says, will eventually sit a throne that will last forever. It'll be the apocalyptic throne. That will be eternal because, earth will be melted and we'll have the new heavenly world that lasts forever. So they're basically bypassing Solomon in order to get rid of the problem of the throne that didn't last forever, and said, no, that wasn't the throne that Nathan was talking about. Nathan was talking about a future throne that will be sat by an actual seed that came directly from the belly of David, because it'll be his son that's kept alive all of this time, right? So this is the extent to which Jewish exegetes would go. Like in that, you would think like, that's ridiculous. And I was like, yeah, but it's documented.
It's the same thing with the lost tribes on the other side of the mountain, or on the other side of that weird river, the mystical river. Like they invent ways to make sure it doesn't fail.
The point being is that you can't scoff at a ridiculous theory, because they're full of ridiculous theories. And this is a perfect example where we have concrete evidence that they did this. They really did come up with this ridiculous theory to get the prophecy to be true. And now, but there's an even easier way to do it. And we know, for example, we have documentation that there was a Jewish belief that there was an angel assigned by God to go and get the sperm out of people's testicles and fly up to God and show the sperm to God and ask, will this person be a rich man, a good man, a bad man, etc. And God, gives his pronouncements, and then the angel flies back and puts the sperm back, and then yada, yada, right? And so you think, well, that's super weird. Yeah, but I'm not making that up. The Jews made that up. That's actual Jewish angelological lore, right? So we know that happens. We know something similar happened to Zoroaster, right? So Zoroaster's semen was magically preserved in a lake for thousands of years. And so every aeon, when there would be a Messiah, there would be a virgin who would bathe in the lake, and that she would get impregnated directly by the seed of Zoroaster. So you could have someone getting impregnated by Zoroaster 1,000 years later. He's long gone, but you can still go to the sperm bank, right? Is this lake. And so that's documented. This isn't something I made up. So you can look at all of these things, and it seems much more obvious that this is the solution, right? Is that what Paul, and especially if you look at Philippians 2, it's like he's not talking about the wandering beggar, right? He's not talking about a guy who is wandering forever. Suddenly God just makes him, right? And that starts the clock and all of this. So that matches that. Well, why wouldn't you have just sent the angel Layla to go get the sperm? And this time, just, we're going to put this in a secret vault. The vault's where we keep like all the snow, because God also stores all the snow and all the rain. There's vaults where they're stored, and they just hold them there. There's like cryopreserved bodies in heaven. Like there's all this. We know all this lore that actually existed. So there'd be no difficulty. I mean, God's God; He can do whatever He wants, right? So of course He can preserve and hold on to this and say, you know what? I'm going to hide this. Satan doesn't know. He's going to think I'm talking about Satan. He's going to think that when I spoke through the voice of Nathan, he's going to mistake it as Solomon, right? And so Satan's going to try and destroy that throne, and tricked you, motherfucker, right? So he's going to drop that semen and then use it to make a body for Jesus. And it says, fulfills Nathan's prophecy. And now, of course, we have the same thing. Instead of the wandering beggar, the lost son, the immortal son of David, we've got a body of David that did literally come from the seed directly from the belly of David, right? And then the throne that he sits will actually last forever, because it's the throne of Jesus, right? So when you triangulate all the evidence, that's the better theory. But even if you, for some reason, just can't handle the fact that ancient thinkers were weird and came up with weird ideas, and all this evidence of sperm magic was common at the time, so we know this. Even if you can't handle that for whatever reason, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to handle it. But even if you can't, we can go back to that metaphorical, the Abrahamic model, right? So like there's multiple ways that we can explain the weird wording. So clearly Paul is trying to make this prophecy happen, and straightforwardly it can't happen that way. So what solution is Paul advocating, right?
Right.
And he doesn't explicitly say. So he doesn't say, well, there was this long descendants through this, like Matthew would say, like there's long descendants of these hidden scions of David that preserve semen from male to male all this time, father to son, etc. And then Jesus just happened to come from that, and we just believe that for whatever reason. Like that's possible, but he doesn't say it, right? And he doesn't say it, and he uses a weird word that suggests maybe that's not what he believes, because he could have just said that, right? He could have said descended from David, but he chose not to. So the question is, what is going on here? And that's why this pillar is weak, right? Because it's like, okay, Paul is being weird. He has to say this anyway because of Nathan's prophecy. So if Paul already started believing in the celestial model, like if a revelation, Jesus came to him in a revelation, and he wouldn't have any reason to doubt this. Like it's the word of fucking God, right? It says him, I died and, I was crucified and resurrected and buried and whatever in the celestial realms. And, Satan did this, but now I have conquered, yada, yada. If Jesus Christ himself told him this, he's not going to doubt it, right? He's going to say, well, shit. And so when he looks at Nathan's prophecy, if that's the order of events, like Jesus himself told you this happened, and then you go to Nathan's prophecy and say, well, then how did he fulfill this prophecy? There's an obvious model. Well, it's the angel Layla. That's God came up with this plan and did this whole thing. So that's why this makes sense. And it's the fact that Paul has to say this anyway. There's no way he could not say that Nathan's prophecy was falsified. So he has to say that Jesus came from the seed of David, no matter what he believes about Jesus. So the thing is that because of that, we cannot predict from his saying it that he believed one thing over another thing, right? Because he has to say it anyway. And that's why we get to that point.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I mean, here's the thing. I think a lot of people get caught up when you're trying to explain using background knowledge or proof of concept that were well known. They go, oh, he thinks that's what it is, and therefore,
yeah.
and it's like, well, Paul doesn't say that much, right? So they need Paul to spell it out for them. If not, they can easily just get magnetically sucked into the black hole of the genealogy of Matthew or in the genealogy of Luke, and then they're stuck with having to fall in line with the typical standard.
But then they run into the problem that doesn't do it, right?
The problem
doesn't fix you, right? You still have to come up with, how did the gospel authors think of this? And whatever solution you come up with, like however you get Matthew's Jesus to be the seed of David, whatever you do, I don't care what theory it is, you could come up with 100 theories. Whatever your theory is for what Matthew himself thought to do that, I guarantee you it would apply just as much to Paul and would make exactly the point I'm making. So there's no way for you to get out of this problem. You cannot escape this problem. You can't get Paul to be talking about biology. There's no way to do it because we don't know.
And just so I'm understanding you properly, Paul is dealing with Nathan's prophecy.
That's right.
So you're saying other Jewish writings that are dealing with Nathan's prophecy have this angel playing a role?
No. So the ones that we have, there might have been many other models, we don't know, but the ones that we have are the immortal son, the wandering beggar who lives 1,000 years, right? So it's the same thing. You're preserving a man instead of a seed, right?
Is this similar to how the Jehovah's, or one of these groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, say that beloved disciple never really died? He's wandering the earth, and they're waiting.
Yeah, so the wandering Jew is a whole other. Yeah, there's the wandering disciple and the wandering Jew. There's a lot of these other myths.
Yeah,
not connected to this.
Okay.
But they're the same idea that God can keep someone alive for as long as he wants.
Got it.
But here they're using that trick that God can keep someone alive as long as he wants.
To preserve
God can do any magic. Yeah, he's preserving the seed in the balls of a guy, right?
That's on earth somewhere.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But of course, another model, which probably was Bar Kokhba's model, which is that there was a hidden family line, right? Like, so the seed is getting passed from father to son. So it's like a ball being handed off.
Yeah.
And then it's secret. Satan doesn't know it, so he can't kill them off. So like it's hidden or whatever. And then suddenly, Bar Kokhba says, yes, I've got my genealogy sheet or whatever that shows secretly, haha, I'm the seed of David, right? So that's another model, right? That would be the one that most historicists think Paul is talking about.
Of course.
But the problem is that we don't know that's the model Paul is talking about. And in fact, the word choices he made actually kind of disincline that, because if he really wanted that to be the model, then he would say what Ignatius said. He would say descendants from David. He wouldn't say made out of the seed of David. That's a weird thing to say.
It
So
makes sense if there's some model, and you're not even saying this is the model. You're giving a proof of concept.
That's right.
Suggesting that some strange magical model.
Yeah.
That the seed.
And it's not just arbitrary. I'm not just making up the possibility.
I know. Listen,
so it's sitting on tons of background knowledge of how this is completely plausible and could make sense
within the Jewish world.
That's right.
But mind you, Cattell Berthelot, who wrote the book Jews and the Roman Rivals, she documents how pagan Rome's ideology, specifically sonship and the fictive kinship, that literally adopting Augustus,
That's right.
The adoption of Augustus.
Adoption was taken seriously in Rome.
100%. And they never had to be genealogical.
That's right.
But they became genealogy through fictive kinship.
And also this is what Paul is saying about Christians, right? He's saying that you are literally the son of God. Like when you go through the baptism, you are adopted by God. That is not like a weak, wishy-washy. It's like, I guess modern Western culture kind of devalues adoption. Like we don't take it seriously. It's like, oh, you're not really my parents. Yeah. But back then they're like, no, you're really my parents. Like this has the same magical effect as biology, right? Like it's hard to, it's right, or more. It's like hard to understand for moderns who devalue adopted children, adoption and stuff. It's hard for them to understand the ancient mindset was way, way more reverent and serious about this. So adoption was real, right?
Itself.
Yeah, it's like adoption is almost like a magical spell that sort of like makes you the seed of whatever. Yeah. And that's kind of what Paul is saying about being the seed of Abraham, is that magic can just make you the seed of something, right? Yeah. So you have this other model, which could be the metaphorical model. And I think really it looks at, you just look at the Gospels, I just think that's kind of the cipher here, is that however you want to explain Matthew, then why couldn't that also be what Paul's talking about? That's the thing. It's like, because you can't get the lost descendants model. Well, Matthew's rejecting it. He's literally telling you that is not what happened. So what did happen, right? So like whatever your solution is for that, you can just apply it to Paul, and then you're getting where I am.
Well, you see why that pickle causes scholars like Bart Ehrman and others to actually go, no. In Matthew's, you could tell it needed to be Joseph. Joseph's the dad. Because if you could say Joseph is the one who actually got Mary pregnant in this story, then guess what? You fix the problem, because Joseph's line.
But see, that's you're already presuming historicity to get to that.
Of course.
The question here is, we're not asking what really happened. The question is, what did Matthew think happened?
Right.
What does he want you to think happened? He does not want you to think that happened. He explicitly is telling you that is not what fucking happened.
Right.
And so now you have to reconstruct. It's like, well, then what does Matthew think happened, right? Like, you can say like, well, Matthew's lying and it was really Joseph had sex with her or whatever. Like, yeah, you could totally say that, but that's not getting at the question, which is, what does Matthew want you to believe happened? And that's what we're talking about. And because Matthew can believe that Jesus was the seed of David without that, because he clearly did. Like he's explicitly telling you that this is the seed of David, but it did not come from Sion, right? It was not a descent. It was something else. So he's telling you that. Now, so that's a fact. That's not me hypothesizing or anything. That's a fact. And if that's the case for Matthew, why can't it also be the case for Paul? And same for Luke. Luke's doing the same thing, right? So Luke also agrees with this. There's something other than descendants is establishing him as the seed of David, something other than that. So whatever that is, if it's sperm magic, well, there you are. If it's metaphor or fiat, well, there you are. And so that's the problem. That's why Romans 1:3 is too ambiguous to be a strong pillar. It's a weak, wobbly pillar that easily falls.
This is actually interesting, because there's a passage in the beginning of John 1, that would be where you would expect a genealogy, and the genealogy is the logos, right?
Yeah. Well, John is deliberately deleting that, but yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. There is a spot in verse 11. He came to his own did not receive him, but as many as received him, to him he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, not of the will of man, of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And okay, well, how did that happen? Right. So if I tell you a weird story,
the same magic,
who cares exactly how it's happened? There's
my point being is that they're aware that it can happen in other ways than our anachronistic thinking, right? So that's why it's ambiguous, and that's why the pillar is weak.
Yeah. Okay, so we've tackled David's seed. We've tackled the idea born of a woman, and now we need to talk about brother of the Lord and James, because James seems to be the one spot that, like, okay, we can get, there's groups of brothers of the
Lord. It's like
the
last echelon of fighting. It's the
this is a bit...
You've lost every trench, and now you're going to lose the tower. This is it.
Right.
This is the last stand. This is your Alamo. This is your Custer's last stand kind
So
of thing.
explain that passage, and then explain the 1 Corinthians. He's like a special... There's James and the 12. Explain these things in a way that can help us to at least see there's...
Yeah, so the key thing is for people to be aware that there's a passage in 1 Corinthians 9 where Paul lists certain people who have a privilege that he's supposed to have himself. And he says the apostles, Peter as the supreme apostle, and the brothers of the Lord. And so the question is, who were the brothers of the Lord? The one that most people focus on is Galatians 1:19, where he says, James, the brother of the Lord. Well, okay, do we mean the James who is the biological brother of the Lord, or is it some other kind of brother of the Lord? So the debate comes around that. What does that mean?
Right.
And so that's what, I detailed this in the original study, but I've all the attempts to try and argue against me, I take care of in Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus. I have a whole chapter on that. And so we can sort of summarize that here.
Yeah. So we're just continuing where we're at for those who are paying close attention. James, the brother of the Lord. Let me just cut to the fluff here. Your new book is, of course, is going to deal with reactions to this over the past decade or so, really spelling out why you're not convinced of their arguments, but also that there seems to be a common phrase for fictive kinship, which we've already been kind of touching on this, that the fictive kinship model is also something well understood within other mystery cults. It's under the Greco-Roman Empire.
And it's also understood in this subject as well. So one of the things that I point out in the new book, Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus, is that something like 10 studies, many of them since I published, so that in the last 10 years since my original publication, there have been a flurry of studies all coming to the same conclusion, that all Christians saw themselves as brothers of the Lord. They all believed that they were adopted sons of God, and therefore they're the brothers of Jesus. And so this idea is no longer just me. It's, basically practically the whole field of people who are specifically looking at this question. No one's come to a different conclusion than this. The question is then, if all, and this is, by the way, Paul says this repeatedly, he articulates it repeatedly in very clear terms, that we are we being the Christians are all the adopted sons of God, and therefore we're all he even says Jesus is the firstborn of many brethren, etc. So he's explicit about this, and he talks about it all the time. So when Christians call each other brother, they mean they're brothers because they're all adopted sons of God, and so they're all part of the same family as Jesus, which means that they are brothers of each other because they're brothers of Jesus. And Paul is specific about the entire concept of salvation is based on this principle. It's not just an idle, extra add-on. It is fundamental to the faith. Because this thing is okay, Jesus is the firstborn, so he's going to inherit the kingdom, right? So if we are brothers of Jesus, we also get to co-inherit the kingdom, right? So if he inherits the kingdom, so will we. All we have to be is his brothers. Right? So the kingdom comes to all of us, essentially, right? So this idea of inheritance is fundamental. The inheritance comes through becoming part of the family of God, the siblings of God, God's Jesus, right? God's son. And this comes even in the allegory we talked about before, Abraham and Sarah and Hagar in Galatians 3 and 4. It's all about inheritance. You read it all the way through. It's about how do we inherit. And of course, he's talking, and he mentions this too in this context, that we inherit too because we become the adopted sons of God, and that makes us full sons of God, and therefore we're all brothers of Jesus, and so we co-inherit. He talks about us being co-heirs with Jesus to the kingdom. So the whole idea of salvation is based on this idea of all Christians being the brothers of the Lord. Now, he talks about that repeatedly and openly, and it's fundamental to faith and all of this stuff. He never once talks about biological brothers of Jesus. So he never mentions them existing. He never talks about, there's this other kind of brother that are biological. He doesn't say brothers in the flesh. And this is important because he does do this on a different occasion when he says, my brethren, the Jews. So he says, my brethren in the flesh, who are the Jews. So he knows he has to make, when he says brethren, he says, okay, I got to be clear here. I don't mean brothers of the Lord. I mean biological inherit, by biological brothers, distantly, because it's a racial category.
Yeah, of course.
But he knows he has to say this. He knows he has to add there in the flesh, right?
So he knows how to differentiate between.
That's right, and he knows that he has to, right? Because otherwise it'll create confusion. So in Galatians 1:19, and he just throws out the line, James, the brother of the Lord. well, why wouldn't he specify in the flesh to say, like, I mean, by the way, I don't mean just any brother of the Lord, like we're all brothers of the Lord. I mean specifically brother in the flesh, right? Or something like, he doesn't have to use the exact phrase, or something. It seems clear that he doesn't know that there is this other category that he has to specify, right? But we know he knows about the fictive category. So if he doesn't know that there's two categories he has to distinguish between, well, the logic dictates that he means fictive. He would, because that's the only concept that he knows.
Can I read the New King James Version?
Yes.
This is interesting, right? It says, "But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother," or brother of the Lord, right? English, New King James.
Yep.
But the point is if you read it this way, he doesn't need to describe the other brothers of the Lord. I just saw this brother of the Lord. That's pretty much kind of what he's saying, right?
It's also important because that gets misinterpreted, the language. The underlying Greek is very convoluted, which means that Paul is being very specific, right? He's not saying, I met two apostles, Peter and James, the brother of the Lord. If he had said that, then that would indicate that James is a brother of the Lord in some way that Peter is not, right? So, but that's not what he says. What he says here is that when I met the apostles, I only met Peter, unless you count James. So like the way it's worded is that it's very clear that he's being very specific that James is not an apostle, the one that he met there. This is James the brother. So it's just a rank and file Christian, a baptized Christian. He's specifying I met that particular James, not the other James, which he talks about in Galatians 2. He says that James is the high-ranking pillar. He's an apostle. So he's saying James the pillar versus James the brother. He's telling you that these are two different Jameses that he's talking about. And now, a lot of people disagree with that and don't want to believe that that's the case, but it's very clear. The Greek is indisputable. There's no really way to get this to work the way that apologists and scholars want it to do. They want them to be the same James, but Paul is absolutely telling you they're not.
Suppose they were the same James for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm reading this, right? "But I saw none of the other apostles except James," meaning maybe James was, let's pretend James is here, the Lord's brother. Would that be a problem for you?
If the Greek had been worded in such a way, because you're reading the English, it's not telling you what the Greek says.
Right.
What if the Greek said, I met two apostles, Peter and James, the brother of the Lord, then yes, that would be evidence that James is the brother of the Lord in some way other than Peter. And the most probable way that would be biological, right? So that would be, in that case, it would be much stronger than 2-to-1 in favor of historicity. It would be like 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 or something. It would be much stronger evidence.
Got it.
Again, not a smoking gun, but it would go up, right? The probability of Jesus would go up. But that's not what Paul said. And this is the important thing, is Paul deliberately went out of his way not to say that. And so he said very clearly, he's saying that this James is not an apostle. But the Greek construction he uses does entail that they are both of the same category. So they are both brothers of the Lord, right? So one is an apostolic brother of the Lord and the other is just a brother of the Lord.
Okay.
And we have examples for like the way Aristotle and others use this same construction to say this way. So that's how we know this. And this is, various scholars have pointed this out. I cite them all and discuss them in the study.
You bring that up for the viewer who might go, I'm not fully persuaded. Are there other scholars who literally don't think that Paul's not saying this, that believe in a historical Jesus? Are there ones that say what you're saying, that James is not the brother of the biological?
Yeah. No. The debate. The scholars just aren't willing to go there. The debate among scholars is whether they accept the Greek as written or whether they deny the Greek as written. And so the debate is over whether that James in Galatians 1:19 is an apostle or not. No one is willing to admit that guy might not be the biological brother of Jesus, even though the evidence plainly indicates that he has to be something other than the biological brother of Jesus. Now, but that's why I present my argument. And so they why do you believe that? Like, why do you think that this is the biological brother of Jesus? And, they list arguments. And what I do is show that none of those arguments are logically valid. They're all fallacious. So it's basically this kind of dogma that the field is trying to defend, and they're not willing to admit it. And this is most clear in one scholar I cite, and I even point this out in the book, that he says, there's 122 references to brothers in the letters of Paul, and they're all fictive, except two. And he says, these two passages. But he gives no reason to believe that those are exceptions. So if all the others are fictive, why would these be different? Like, he doesn't give any reason why to believe that. It's just a dogma. And I think it's one of those dogmas that once you admit it, like it grates against Christian theology and Christian belief too much to be too scary. I don't think they want to go there, right? But when you look at the evidence plainly, that's what it says. And the irony is, though, that this isn't by itself very strong evidence against historicity either, because it's entirely possible that he just happened to meet James, a brother of the Lord, as a Christian. And there could still be biological brothers of Jesus. Like, Paul is not telling us that there were no brothers of Jesus, right? He's not telling us that Jesus had no family or anything. So all we're doing here is noting that he doesn't mean in this one place. He does not mean biological brothers here, so we can't get evidence for historicity out of there. But that is not in and of itself evidence against historicity.
Yeah, I get it.
And you can make a case that it is weak evidence against historicity, but I don't want to get into that because that's on the bottom margin of my error margin. So we're talking about the top margin. How far can I go reasonably and still like accept that this is plausible? How far can I go in favor of historicity? And that's where I'm at right now and what we're talking about.
I see what you're saying. And again, you personally would be like, look, based on all these other fictive kinship that we all see, and the fact that he can dichotomize between of the flesh and not of the flesh.
Yeah, and the grammar of the passage.
There's better to just say we're not, like, don't be so confident.
Exactly. And that's, again, remember, I'm still counting this 2-to-1 in favor of historicity. So I'm still granting the argument for historicists. I'm just saying it's weak. And so it's another one of those pillars. It's a wobbly pillar. It's a weak pillar. Now, I think on the other side of my margin error, the pillar falls out altogether, but that's, again, no one cares about the bottom margin. They want to know what I think the best odds on Jesus are, not the worst odds.
Okay. Look, you saw the 3 pillars. You've heard his explanation. I wanted to try and get into the weeds a little bit through as much as we can without getting any.
Right, yeah.
You really got to get your book.
And it's right, yeah. If people want to get into it, that's all the citations are there, all the scholarship is cited there. The arguments are gone through in really clear detail, so you really can see it. And I'm not leaving anything out, so there's not some brilliant argument out there against me that is not covered, right? So yeah, it's all there.
Thank you so much. Get the book. Join our Patreon. Look, I took your questions and we asked the scholars. I really could use more support so MythVision can keep the lights on and we can keep growing. I really appreciate it.